Today we're going to be discussing editing and essential audio processing tools like EQs, compressors, and what the heck is a limiter. Hello everybody and welcome to WaveSpot. My name is Austin Knaus and I've been working with audio for the past 2 decades. My goal for this channel is to share all the fundamentals that I've learned along the way in hopes to give you a fast track to understanding the world of sound. So, let's dive in. I have 3 golden rules that I go by. The first is you can't polish a turd. Second is just because you have a tool doesn't mean you should use it. And third, creating music is about learning when to let it be. So what do I mean by you can't polish a turd? Well, you'll often hear this phrase a lot in audio. And what it means is if your initial recording isn't good, then it isn't good. If your initial recording doesn't sound the way you want it to, there's no amount of processing that you can do that's going to make it sound the way you want it. The best way to make a sound the way you want it is to have the initial recording be the way you want it in the first place. Your initial recording should get you about 80% of the way there. Another 10% can be brought out by a little bit of processing. The last 10% is just understanding just to let it be, let it go, let it be what it is, let it live. There's no reason to force it to be something that it's not. Number 2, just because you have a tool doesn't mean you should use it. Just because you have an EQ in your toolbox doesn't mean you should use it. And just because you have a compressor doesn't mean you need to compress things. We have tools for reasons. There should be a reason why you're reaching for a tool. You know, we use a hammer to drive nails into wood. We use a drill to drill holes in a wall. We use bolt cutters to cut a bolt. We don't use bolt cutters to drive a nail into wood, and we don't use a drill to cut a bolt. There's a reason for the tool. So, unless the reason presents itself, there's no reason to use the tool. Tools are designed for a very specific task, and unless that task presents itself, there's no reason to apply the tool. And lastly, number 3 is creating music is learning when to let it be. You're going to be your worst enemy. You're going to be overcritical, and being overcritical is just that, being overcritical. 90% of the people that listen to your music aren't going to hear it the same way that you do. A lot of people can only listen to 3 things at one time anyways, so the amount of intricacies that you have in your music are only really appreciated by the people that understand the intricacies of music and the ones that can actually hear it. The general population, they don't understand. So, let it be. Learning to utilize your tools to preserve the essence of the magic that the audio holds without actually manipulating it to make it something is an art in itself. I always like to say there's a reason why you picked a sound. It's because you liked it in the first place. And the more processing you add on top of that thing eventually degrades it and makes it something that it wasn't in the first place. Soon you'll be using a whole lot of processing and find that you don't actually like that sound when you originally liked it in the first place. Again, you are your own worst enemy. Learning when to let it be, when to let it go, and to let it be what it is an art. Making music is about discovery. It's about finding things, discovering things through experimentation and being weird and creative. So with all that being said, let's dive in. So we're going to start with editing and cutting, trimming, and fading. So what's cutting and trimming? For that, let's dive into the DAW really quick. So you can see here, I have one solid audio clip. This is a vocal take, so let's listen to it really quick.
Take a walk through the dark, just to find out what it's like to not be afraid when you're alone.
So that's what she sounds like with no processing at all. What you notice here at the front is all of this noise. Right? This is just her sitting in front of the microphone. So the first thing that we can do is we can get rid of that. We don't need any of that. What cutting and trimming is all about is getting rid of the excess ambient space or the noise in between. In this case, I picked this one is because she actually hits the microphone right here.
Ooh.
So what we can do is we can edit that out. How do we do that? Well, we have to cut it, trim it, and fade it. So here we have some empty space. What we can do is we can click in the center and right click. We can split the audio or cut it, slice it, each DAW is going to have a different terminology for it. We can also use Control and E to cut it. So let's do that. Click, Control, E. And now you can see that we have this clip and we have this clip. What we're going to do is we're going to shorten this up and we're going to listen really quick.
Take a walk through the dark.
So we can see that this is the K in dark. At the front, we have a sharp inhale. We don't want that sharp inhale. So what we can do is we can get rid of that. This right here is trimming. We're now trimming this audio clip. So now we've cut and we've trimmed this audio clip. Now what we're going to do is fade it. In Ableton, we have this little box up here. And what fading is it's taking the volume and over a period of time, we fade it in. And then on the back half, we're going to fade it out.
Take a walk through the dark.
Now the reason why we fade it is, watch what happens if I cut this too close and we don't fade it.
Take a walk through the dark.
It's choppy, especially in the front.
Take a.
And what that does is it creates this click or a pop at the beginning, and we don't want that. So let's shorten it up and let's fade it in. Even if it's a little bit, it doesn't have to be a lot. Let's get that K back in here. And we'll fade that. You want it to sound natural, that's the goal.
Take a walk through the dark.
So this is the process of cutting, trimming, and fading. So what we can do is we can trim this bit, fade it in, find the next bit, cut that, trim it, fade it up. Go to the next bit, trim it, fade it in. Find the next bit of information. There we go. We can cut that, trim it, and then fade it out. And then what you get, final product, is something that looks like this.
Take a walk through the dark, just to find out what it's like to not be afraid when you're alone.
So that is editing. It's cutting, trimming, and fading your audio in between all of the spaces that you might have a breath, or in this case over here, we have her hitting the microphone on accident. So one thing that I want to mention before we move on to the next topic is this is what she sounds like with just the microphone. There's no effects, there's no processing going on. This is just the original take. It was taken with a Neumann TLM 103. This is what she sounds like.
Take a walk through the dark, just to find out what it's like to not be afraid when you're alone.
The very first take is what sounded the way we wanted it to. Next, we're going to do a high-level overview of the tools that we have at our disposal. We're going to cover EQ, compressors, limiters, and frequency analyzers. First off, we have equalizers, or an EQ. They were originally designed to balance the tonality of telecommunications and live broadcasts and radio. Now, if you're not familiar what a frequency is, check out this video up here where I explain exactly what frequencies are. Essentially, it's just sound, but at different intervals. An EQ is like a gain knob, or a volume knob, if you will, for each individual frequency. There's three primary EQs that we're going to look at: a graphic equalizer, a parametric equalizer, and a filter. So first we're going to discuss a graphic equalizer. What is a graphic EQ? A graphic EQ is a equalizer that has set frequencies, right? So there's a knob per frequency. Now we can either turn it up, which is called boosting, or we can turn it down, which is called cutting or attenuating. They can come in just a handful of bands, or they can get all the way up to 60 bands. The second type of equalizer we're going to talk about is a parametric EQ. Now, a parametric EQ is essentially infinite, because what we can do is we can pick whichever frequency that we want, and we can either narrow or widen the band that we're working with. We can turn it up or we can turn it down. Now, the last type of equalizer that we're going to talk about is called a filter. Now, a filter is like a single band equalizer. And what that does is it either cuts out the high end or it cuts out the low end, or vice versa. It allows the high end to pass or allows the low end to pass. Now, this can be kind of tricky because it's a perspective verbiage. A low pass is a high cut. A high pass is a low cut. And you can see here, this tool is our filter. Right now we have a low pass or a high cut. So it's getting rid of all of the information above it and allowing the low information to pass through. Now, the opposite would be a high pass filter or a low cut filter. Same thing. It allows the high information to pass and prevents the low information from coming out.
I don't think I know myself like
So we have graphic equalizers, which are like fixed band EQs. We have a parametric EQ, which is infinitely between. You just turn the knob and it changes the frequency. And then we have filters, which are like single band equalizers. Typically, they're in low pass or high pass or low cut or high cut. Depending on the application is depending on the verbiage. So next we're going to talk about a compressor. And what does a compressor do? Well, it compresses the dynamic range of an audio signal. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what dynamic range is, check out this video and then head back on over here and it should make more sense. So a compressor uses different ratios to squeeze the audio. We can see that this portion of the recording is louder than this portion of the recording. So instead of taking this portion right here and adjusting the gain, so we did this manually, right? We just made this section louder than it was prior, and now it looks a little bit more even. So instead of doing that manually, you can use a compressor and it will do it automatically for you. So we'll deep dive into how compressors work and how to actually utilize them, set them up, and tune them in a future episode dedicated to compressors themselves. For now, we just need to understand that compressors compress the dynamic range of a signal. Next, we're going to talk about limiters. What is a limiter? So what a limiter is like a compressor, but it has an infinity to 1 ratio, meaning that nothing passes the threshold that you set. So if we take that same vocal clip and we use a limiter instead, we can see that nothing's going to pass our threshold.
I don't think I know myself like I thought I did. I don't think I know myself like I thought I did.
You can see that hard line down there.
I don't think I know myself like I thought I did.
Now, what a limiter is primarily used for is at the very end of your master chain, it keeps you from hitting 0 dB and clipping on your master. So it's important that whenever you do use a limiter, that you set the output to -1 dB. This gives you 1 dB before you actually hit 0. This keeps your audio clean and prevents you from distorting at the very end of your mastering chain. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is a spectrum analyzer. And what a spectrum analyzer does is it allows us to visualize our frequency spectrum. So from 20 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz, or the entire spectrum of the audible frequencies. Now, I put this on my master channel, and what that allows me to do is see what's going on. Now, this tool right here is a spectrum analyzer by Voxengo Span, which is actually a free tool to download. I have a link at wavespot.com in the blog post that I wrote for this lesson. Now, it's a really good tool. I use it on literally every single song I've ever made. And what it allows us to do is view the frequencies going on.
I don't think I know myself like I thought I did.
Now you can see down here
I don't think I know myself like
that there's actually a whole lot of bass going on in that voice that you can't actually hear, but it's still affecting the mix.
I don't think I know myself like I thought I did.
So what we can do is we can take an EQ and we can get rid of all of that bass in there, and we can see what happens.
I don't think I know myself like I thought I did.
And now that bass is gone.
I don't think I know myself like
If we got rid of the EQ,
I don't think I know
that bass is back. So there's an example of how a spectrum analyzer can help you make a decision. And that's the purpose of using a spectrum analyzer or a frequency analyzer. So I know I just kind of glazed over the top of everything, and we didn't get too far into actually how to use the tools. I just wanted to make it a point to address them. Now, because we have the tools doesn't mean that we need to use them. But whenever you're first starting out, throwing a bunch of tools on there and listening to how they work and operate is the best way to learn. Go in there and destroy some stuff. Go in there and try to break things. You're not gonna hear the way they work unless you go to use them. Now in the future, there's gonna be dedicated lessons to how to use an equalizer, when to use an equalizer, why to use an equalizer, the whole nine. And we're also gonna have them on compressors and limiters and all the different effects. We only covered 4 things today. There's a plethora of different audio devices and processors out there. I just wanted to introduce the basic fundamentals of each one. If you found any of this information valuable, make sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button. I release a new video every Monday. If you learned something new, or if you still have questions, leave a comment below and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you want to read more on the topic, head over to wavespot.com. I have much more detailed information and all of today's illustrations written in a blog post. And until next time, thanks for watching.